welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 17. Starting out this week with Webb of Inertia. 2 and a blue enchantment. At the beginning of combat on each opponent's turn, that player may exile a card from their graveyard. If that player doesn't, creatures they control can't attack you this turn. This is sort of a sneaky good card, you know. It's a sort of a pillow fort strategy, I guess. Obviously, you can use this, and I've seen people use this where they'll cast like a Rest in Peace, and everyone's graveyard's completely exiled, so they can't attack you at all. So you can do that. Or Leyline of the Void, right? I exile my opponent's graveyards, so they can't possibly pay the cost to do this. However, this is sneaky good, okay? If you're doing this in your playgroup, your friends might not love it, but they'll go, okay, I'm attacking you with my giant creature, and they'll go, oh, well, did you exile a card from your graveyard? And they go, oh, okay, well, I'll exile a card. And you go, at the beginning of combat, on your turn, you have to exile a card, right? It's already too late. By the time you get to the declare attacker step, it's already too late to pay the cost for Webb of Inertia, right? So that's why, and I know it may be a little underhanded, so it can be really sneaky good that way. Next up, Wicked Pact. 1 black sorcery, destroy 2 target non-black creatures. You lose 5 life. So I saw this one, and I literally was making my Willow Dusk deck when I saw this card, and I was just like, man, that might really work good in a Willow Dusk deck, you know, because the lose 5 life actually is helpful. You cast this for 3 mana, destroy 2 creatures, you lose 5 life, you activate your Willow Dusk, and you put 5 counters on, you know, one of your creatures. You know, I was just making my Willow Dusk deck, and like right after I posted it, I saw this card and I thought that might actually work really good in the deck, just because the lose 5 life, you're going to take advantage of that, right? So it might be worth consideration. Next up, Willowseder. 2 green seder. You may choose not to untap Willowseder during your untap step. Tap, gain control of target legendary creature for as long as you control Willowseder, and Willowseder remains tapped. So yes, I know this card is very expensive, okay? It's like a $200 card or something. Okay, but guess what? I haven't really recommended a super expensive card in a very long time, not since Force Field, okay? I thought I would throw it out there. You know, there are people that can run out and buy this card if they want to. It's really fantastic in Commander, obviously, right? And it's in green. You see these kind of effects in blue a lot, obviously. In green, you don't really, okay? Just tap, gain control of target legendary creature. I mean, in Commander, that's pretty darn good. Everyone's got a legendary creature, more than likely, right? So in Commander, this is a really fantastic card. I realize it's super expensive. It's probably on the reserve list or whatever. Okay, I'm throwing it out there. It is a pretty unique effect in green, and it's a really good card in Commander, so I thought I would give it a mention. Next up, coming in at number 4, Wild Research. And this is a really interesting one. By the way, I tend to mention enchantments a lot. By far, of all the cards I've recommended, the type I've recommended the most are enchantments. I'm not sure why that is. 2 and a red, enchantment. Pay 1 and a white, search your library for an enchantment card. Reveal that card, put it into your hand, then discard a card at random. Pay 1 and a blue. Search your library for an instant card, reveal that card, put it in your hand, and discard a card at random. Very unique, very interesting card. I've seen it in Commander games a couple of times, but haven't seen it in years. I mean, first of all, you got to play it in a Jeskai deck or a, you know, it's a red, white, and blue card. So you got to have all of those colors in your Commander's color identity, obviously, right? And, you know, it's a tutor. It's a repeatable tutor. That's fantastic. And especially search your library for an enchantment card. That you don't see that a lot. You know, I don't love the discard a card at random. You could obviously discard, you know, for all the people out there that like playing Gamble, you know how it works, right? You can discard the card you just searched for. That's not super great. However, if you want stuff in your graveyard, that could be okay, right? If you are playing a deck where maybe you want instants and sorceries in your graveyard, you could just search your library for an instant, and if you discard it, so what? Red has a lot of stuff like Conspiracy Theorist now. I love that card. I put it pretty high on my list of Strixhaven cards because I just think it goes in a lot of decks. And this is another way that you can protect that stuff, right? You have Conspiracy Theorist in play. If you search for something and you accidentally throw it in the graveyard, now you can actually play it. So it works really good good there too. Just a very unique and very interesting card that I think could be used in a lot of different strategies. Coming in at number 5, Widespread Panic, another enchantment, 2 and a red enchantment. Whenever a spell or ability causes its controller to shuffle their library, that player puts a card from their hand on top of their library. Like, this isn't a commander card, and I've never seen it. Why have I never seen this card? It seems really good to me. I've never seen anyone play this in a game. It hates on a lot of stuff, okay? First of all, it hates on ramping, right? Because we all know ramping, like all those Tatiova decks are going to be searching their library lots, which is going to cause them to shuffle. And every time that they do that, they have to put a card from their hand on top of their library. That pretty much just undoes the draw effect that they're getting. Because they rampant growth, they put a land into play, draw a card, now they have to put it right back on top of their library. It pretty much just undoes that. You know, you have anyone in your play group that just likes to throw tons of tutors in their deck, this is going to be punishing them big time. Putting a card from your hand on top of your library is way worse than discarding. Discard can actually, like from the last card as we've just seen, discard can actually be a good thing sometimes. With this, you have to put it on top of your library. There's really not a lot of great ways, and I mean, unless your opponent is playing an Aminatou deck maybe or something, there's not a lot of great ways to take advantage of that. I suppose you could get into the situation where your opponent's playing a Yuriko deck or a Yanet deck or something, and they actually could take advantage of this. If that was the case, I would just leave it in my hand and I wouldn't play it, right? Like, I'm putting this in decks. I'm putting this in decks because it just really hates on the strategies of I'm tutoring lots and also I'm ramping lots, right? Like, I'm searching my library for lots of lands. So I think it's great there. Next up, Winds of Change. 1 mana sorcery. Each player shuffles the cards from their hand into their library, then draws that many cards. And this is maybe my least favorite card in the entire format. So it's odd that I'm mentioning it. I really don't like it. It's kind of expensive, and the reason why it is because it's kind of hard to find. And also it's an incredibly powerful effect. For 1 mana, everyone has to shuffle their, right? So in an Nekusar deck, this is going to be fantastic, right? Everyone shuffles their hand away and then draws that many cards. It's a whole bunch of draw triggers for your Nekusar deck. Any deck like that, maybe you're playing your Locust God deck and you just want to shuffle away your hand and draw a bunch of cards. How this is really, really punishing. And again, this is why I personally hate it, because everyone will look at this and go, oh, well, just a wheel. What's the big deal? You can play this on turn 1. And I've played games where everyone mulligans and keeps their hand. Okay, I got a good hand. And then first turn, some guy goes, Winds of Change. And now the good hand you have, you just had to shuffle it away and then, you know, draw a bad hand, maybe a hand with no lands. So it can completely screw you. I don't even know why. Why am I mentioning this card? What's wrong with me? Don't play this card. This is a card you shouldn't be putting in your commander decks. Listen, I always mention cards that I think just work really well in certain strategies, whether I like it or not. So there it is. Coming in at number 7, Withering Boon. 1 and a black. Instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, pay 3 life. Counter target creature spell. And when I did my off-color removal, sort of, you know, off-color counter spells, I sort of included counter spells in that list. This was one that a couple people were like, hey, what about Withering Boon? Yeah, definitely. It's a black counter spell. It only counters creatures. The pay 3 life is, you know, as we know, probably meaningless. It's just a black, I counterspell my opponent's creature, right? If for anyone who doesn't know that it exists, there it is. Coming in at number 8, Wood Sage. And again, this is another card. I think I mentioned Warping Worm in my last video and about how that was the first multicolored card I had ever actually cracked in a pack. This was the second one. And this is another one that I was trying to figure out a way to use it and I just couldn't. It's a blue-green human druid. You tap, choose a creature card name, reveal the top 4 cards of your library and put all of them with that name into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. So I was trying to figure out like how to use this card, right? What I didn't realize though is it's great for filling your graveyard. Like a Sidisi deck, for example, if you're playing a blue-green deck that wants stuff in your graveyard, this is just tap, put 4 cards in your graveyard, right? Because you're going to reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You name a creature card that isn't in your deck, and then you just dump 4 cards in your graveyard. So it can be good that way. I think it's particularly good in a Sidisi deck. You know, I've never made a Sidisi deck, but if I did make one, I would have Sensei's Divining Top, or I would have Miri's Guile, or I would have stuff where I look at the top of my library, so I'm not dumping stuff. You know, I don't love self-mill, so I don't want to be dumping a bunch of stuff that I want in my hand into my graveyard, right? So maybe I'm doing a mini Sidisi deck here, but You put Miri's Guile in there, so at the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top 3 cards, you put the one on top that you want to draw, and then the other 2 you don't care about. They can go into your graveyard, right? And then Wood Sage is perfect. I think Wood Sage is a perfect inclusion in a Sidisi deck. Again, you know what's on top of your library, so you can tap it to draw the creature that you actually want in your hand. You just name that card, and then you can dump the rest in your graveyard because you want stuff in your graveyard as well. So it can be used that way, more specifically in a Sidisi deck. It can be used just in a graveyard deck if you want to be dumping stuff in your graveyard. It can also be used in any sort of deck where you are always looking at the top of your library, right? Just a very unique, interesting card with a lot of uses, I think. Next up, coming in at number 9, Xenic Poltergeist. 1 black spirit. Tap until your next upkeep. Target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness, each equal to its mana value. So when I mentioned a few videos back about Gate to Phyrexia and Phyrexian Tribute and Phyrexian Gremlins, from what I know, those are the only cards in black that deal with artifacts. You know, I always like to talk about the off-color removal, right? Because Commander is color-specific, having answers in specific colors is really important, I think. And a couple of people are like, hey, what about Xenic Poltergeist? Yeah, okay. I mean, you're going to make an artifact, a non-creature artifact, into an artifact creature. Yeah, that definitely is a way. So if you're in a play group where your buddies like to play Mana Crypts and maybe Mox Diamonds, I don't know, this just gets rid of them. Also, because black has lots of great creature removal, you can just turn their, Soul Ring into a 1/1 creature and then kill it. This is really good also in a deck. I've mentioned a lot now about Varchild's War Riders, Mog Infestation. There's lots of decks out there that want your opponents to have creatures so that you can then kill them. If your opponents don't have creatures, your deck doesn't do much. So you want your opponents to have creatures. If they don't have any creatures, you just sit there. Maybe you need a death trigger or something like an Alenda deck maybe, right? So this can be good for, I make my opponent's artifact into a creature just so they have a creature, so then I can just kill it and I can get that advantage as well. And finally today, Zur's Weirding. Another weird card that, no pun intended, that I opened in packs back in the day, and I was like, how the heck are you supposed to use this? So 3 and a blue, another enchantment. Players play with their hands revealed. Okay, so right away, this can be a card that you can just put in your deck just because it makes for a fun, interesting commander game, right? If a player would draw a card, any player, they reveal it instead. Okay, so all players are going to reveal their cards as they draw them. Then any other player may pay 2 life. If a player does, put that card into its owner's graveyard. Otherwise, that player draws that card. So basically what happens is everyone plays with their hands revealed, so everyone can see everyone else's hand, and everyone can see what everyone else draws. You're going to reveal the card that you draw in your turn, and all your opponents are going to look at it and go, yeah, I don't want you to have that, and they pay 2 life, okay? And the next turn, your opponent's turn, same thing happens, right? So it can make for a very fun, interesting game, maybe. Like, you could really build around this card. If your opponents have really low lives, then they won't be able to pay the 2 life, and maybe you play this in a life gain deck where you have lots of life and you can just make your opponents discard everything they draw. If you're playing a graveyard deck, I think this card is really good because you want stuff in your graveyard, right? Your opponents go, oh, I don't want you to have that, so I'm going to make you discard it. And you're like, fine, great, I want it in my graveyard, so what do I care? So if you're playing a graveyard deck in blue, this might be really good. If you're playing a Ghost of Ramirez Di Pietro deck, maybe this is really good because your opponent makes you throw it in your graveyard, you just attack with your Ghost, then you can put it back into your hand, right? Also a Lazav deck. If you're playing a Lazav Dimir Mastermind deck, I mean, there's lots of graveyard decks that could use this card, I think. A Lazav deck, though, you can choose what you want your Lazav to turn into, basically. Very interesting card, very unique. It can just make for interesting, fun games if you want to have, maybe you're playing a Chaos deck. That'd be a great include in that as well. Just a lot of really crazy, weird ways to use this card, I think. And that is the end of the alphabet. For anyone who's been keeping track, I'm at Z now, so that is it. I've gone through the whole alphabet. However, I'm not done. Have no fear. The first time I went through the list, interestingly enough, I had a filter Basically, the cards that I have mentioned so far is only about half of all the cards that are actually available in Commander. So any of my regular viewers that watch this and they're like, oh no, he's at the end. I'm not. I'm actually going back around, starting back at A, and there's probably going to be at least double as many videos as there was before. And for any astute viewers, maybe you can actually look at the videos and try to figure out the filter that I was using when I did the first run through. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards that I think people should give consideration for their Commander decks. Thank you for tuning in.